Welcome. This is St Thomas Church. It's great to have you in here. This is the offices, and this is the third week of our exploration of Covenant and Kingdom. And because we're getting to the real meat this week, we're getting into kind of some of the detail of our study together. I thought I'd bring you into a slightly more serious environment. I thought I'd bring you into my office, where I've got the facility to be able to use the whiteboard. Pay note of the depth of knowledge that is, and the wisdom that must be divested into me because I read so much. And just while we're on books, if any of you have any of my books, I am coming to hunt you down. Okay, well, on that light note, it's week 3. I thought I'd keep the same clothes on for you. They're not that smelly, they've been washed each week. But what we're going to look at today, really, really important, we're going to get down to a bit more of the nitty-gritty. We're going to look at covenant. Covenant, if you will remember, is the word that describes our relationship. It's the word that describes our being. It's the word that describes the nature of our position in God. And covenant is something we're not very familiar with as a culture today. It's something that we have very few echoes of in our day-to-day culture, but it's something that was prevalent. The people of the Bible understood and were a covenant-making culture. They were people who were familiar with what it means to make a covenant. And just for information, whenever the word covenant appears, particularly in the Old Testament, it always means to cut a covenant. That will be helpful later on as we talk. Covenant really was the thing that secured safety in the Old Testament times. There was no police, there was no law and order. Tribes lived in geographical areas, and if you were not a member of that tribe, your life was in danger. There were many stories of wandering people who happened to stray into territory occupied by another tribe. They would be boiled in oil, they would be cut apart, cut to pieces, fed to the vultures. And really the only way, in the absence of law and order, that you were secured and your safety was assured was that you entered into covenant with somebody else. Covenant meant that two different people, two separate lives and individuals, decided to enter into an agreement where they became two people, became one. Really important. Two different people enter into a covenant, and the covenant meant that they became one new identity, one new relationship. Two became one. Sometimes it was an equal partnership, so two people of equal standing would agree to come into a relationship with each other. Sometimes it would be two people of unequal standing, so the greater would confer upon the lesser the right to come into a relationship. Anytime a covenant took place, it required a few fundamental things. It required that something symbolically died, because as two people become one, what happens is your identity changes, and when your identity changes, something in you has to die, because you're moving from two to one. So every time a covenant was made, you cut a covenant because something had to die, and because the people didn't want to die, they crucified animals. They crucified something which symbolically represented death of an old identity, so that you could enter into a new identity. So the two people would gather together some of their prized possessions, i.e. the animals, and they would crucify them, they would slaughter them. They would then arrange the animals, and I don't know if I'm able to draw this, but I'm not. Let's take, this is half a cow. So they would take half a cow, and they would arrange it. There's the other half of the cow. Oops, hello. It's going a little bit wrong. And they would do that with a number of different animals. They would put a number of different animals cut in half so that they would be creating almost a corridor of blood. Let's add a few effects in here, shall we? Let's see if I've got a bit of red. We can make... So the blood of the animals would be coming out because they'd all been slaughtered, and we would create a corridor of blood. Something had been sacrificed to represent death of an old identity. Then the people would pass between the pieces to represent that one person was exchanging places with the other. So this man might be called Bob, and this man might be called Simon. And so Bob would pass between the pieces, and representing his taking up Simon's identity, he would go and stand where Simon once was. Simon would journey through the pieces towards Bob and stand where Bob once was, to represent that now they had exchanged places, they had taken one another's identity. What they would also do during the ceremony would be that they would take each other's name. So Bob would now become Bob Simon, to represent that he had taken on the identity and the name of the other person. Simon would become Simon Bob, and because he was taking on Bob's identity. Your name is changed, something dies. And what they would also do, which they do in some parts of the world even today, is they would scar their bodies. They would scar their bodies so that they would, every time they looked at that scar, they would remember that they are in covenant. Often it was the heel of the hand, and they would slit that with a knife and then get ash from the fire and place it in the wound, so that when the wound healed, it healed such that it left a significant scarring. Sometimes African tribes, even today, scar their faces so that they can other people know, and they themselves know, that they are in covenant with particular people. So there was a scarring, a name change, and death of something to represent a death of an identity. They would also, in doing that, now take on the resources of the other person. If Bob was a sheep herder at the time and had 100 sheep, and Simon was a pig farmer and had 100 pigs, Bob would now own not only his 100 sheep, but the 100 pigs as well, because he is now one with Simon. Everything that belongs to Simon now belongs to him. Simon's enemies are now his enemies. Simon's friends are now his friends. So we have this exchange that took place, and really the only remaining vestige that we have of this exchange taking place is the one that takes place in marriage. Marriage, what happens? It's the only echo, the only remaining feature of our culture that represents the same covenant-making process. We have two individuals who say that they're going to become one. The Bible says that you become one flesh. Two people profess to one another. They say, in sickness and health, it doesn't matter what, we're now one. They take on a new identity. They change names to represent the fact that their identity has changed. They, rather than making a scar, they exchange rings. In the ancient ceremonies, even in this country, they would scar around about where the thumb was, and they would bring their hands together to represent that they were coming into covenant. Thankfully now we exchange rings, and the ring represents the covenant. And you also share everything. All that you have is mine. Everything that belongs to me now belongs to you. All of your enemies are my enemies. So we have this process taking place of covenant. We exchange identity. We take on that which belongs to the other person, and we become one with them. Next time, I'm going to explore both that biblically by looking at the story of Abraham, and then going to reflect on our new identity in the light of the cross. See you next week, where we'll talk about this a little bit more. Have a great week. Bye-bye.